Sometimes you just want to watch the world burn, but unfortunately, I can't help you with that. What I can do is help you stack hundreds of burns on enemies in Expedition 33 and then nuke them for massive damage. So far, I've been playing through New Game Plus. I'm about halfway through Act 2, and this build's awesome. In fact, it's one of the best builds I've tried so far. I've been crushing everything I've come across, and that includes things in scary side areas of the game that I'm not sure I should have been fighting at this level. With that said, after I complete New Game Plus, and especially after I get a few more pictos, I'm definitely going to be experimenting with more builds. So if this kind of thing interests you, do be sure to get subscribed and maybe leave a like while you're down there. But now, let's get into things, starting with how this build works. So the whole thing is built around Verso with Corpesso to stack burns on the enemy. The higher Verso's rank, the more burns you stack, and with double burn, you get, you guessed it, twice as many burns for 10 total stacks on each basic attack. You start off with free aim shot to mark and burn the enemy while trying to dump AP. You want to use at least one free aim shot per turn, but in your first turn of the two you'll have with Cheater, try to save 3 or 4 AP for the next turn after the enemy's already debuffed. Then, auto attack. At S rank, this adds 10 burn stacks per hit, which is doubled to 20. It also inflicts greater defenseless, making the enemy vulnerable to damage. Next turn, do that all again. It's pretty darn simple. There are a couple other skills that you can add into your rotation, but they're a little more niche, so I'll cover them in the skill section of this video. And then next up you have Myel, which is your nuke character. And she is primarily using Burning Canvas. This skill hits harder per burn stack on the enemy. And it's really handy that Verso is able to stack so many burns. You start in Virtue Stance, thanks to Medallum, and provided that Verso had a turn before Myel, which he always should thanks to the first strike that he has, you can get right to the burning, unleashing a bunch of big hits. After that, swift stride to get back into Virtue Stance, rinse, and repeat. Occasionally, you will also need to use Degagement if an enemy is too resistant to fire damage. And then last up, Ciel, who's there to act as a support. Her weapon Lithesen gives all allies greater haste and all enemies greater slow while she is in Twilight state. You get this by casting one Sun skill and one Moon skill. Pretty handy that with Cheater you have exactly 2 turns. So your Sun skill of choice is Fortune's Fury, doubling the damage an ally deals for 1 turn. Typically you want to use this on Myel, but sometimes it's helpful on Verso as well, especially if Myel needs to use her turn to break an enemy or get back into Virtue Stance. And then your Moon skill is Intervention, which you want to use to jump an ally ahead of enemies in the turn order and restore some of their AP. Fun fact, with Cheater they play twice, so you're functionally giving them 2 turns. And so the end result here is you're constantly hitting for millions while stacking literally hundreds of burns on the enemy. But now let's get into things in a little bit more detail. Alright, so let's start with Verso. He is using the Corpesso weapon. Base attack applies 2 burn stacks per rank. So at S rank, it applies, well, quite a lot of burn. You get +1 AP on rank up, which makes it slightly more efficient to climb up to S. And at S rank, you get 300% increased burn damage. So not only are you stacking a lot of burns on enemies, but they hit very, very hard. Now for skills, I have a bunch here, but realistically, only 2 of them matter, because most of the time he is just going to be using free aim shot and basic attack. The 2 are follow-up, which is situational. At S rank, you can use it for 2 AP after a bunch of free aim shots to finish off a weakened vote. Typically hits for like 1 mil, maybe 2 to 3 mil if he's boosted from CL. And then Phantom Stars, which is an AoE break that's relatively cost efficient at 5 AP. In general though, you should always try to be auto-attacking and not using your skills unless you absolutely have to. For stat distribution, I don't actually have the perfect stat distribution here. Agi, absolutely max that out. After that, Might. After that, enough luck to get 75% crit. I was using a weaker Pictos before. That's why I'm up to 81 here. I should realistically drop my luck down a bit and swap that for Vitality for even more damage. In terms of Pictos, first up Cheater, because you want to play twice in a row, and it's pretty pricey, so you want it on at least one of your 3 main characters. Then Survivor, same thing, this saves you 20 Lumina points, and I found Verso to be the most Lumina point heavy character, wanting around 200 to even like 220. I could definitely add a lot more damage to this build if I had more Lumina points. And then the last one is just about getting a lot of speed and capping out your crit at 75%. Now for Luminos, I'm going to break these into basically 3 categories. The first is defensive stuff. So most of the defensive stuff here is coming directly from the Pictos, like Cheater and Survivor. But solidifying is very important. +2 shields if a character's health falls below 50%. So when your survivor procs, you'll get +2 shields, and in media res for +3 shields at battle start, but max health is halved. At higher difficulties, and especially New Game Plus, a lot of stuff one-shots you. If you have a shield, it can't one-shot you. Now, the second category is the damage stuff related to burning. This would be critical burn, which is, of course, capping out his crit. Fueling break, so that when he breaks something, the burn stacks are doubled. Painted power, uncap your damage, obviously. Longer burns, so the burn stays on enemies. This is really only useful against bosses, against normal foes. They don't live long enough for burn stacks to fall off anyway. Double burn, super important. This is like the thing you absolutely must equip. And then for setting this up, exposing attack with greater defenseless, enemies take 40% increased damage. So after his first turn, they'll be very, very vulnerable. Combo attack, you hit twice, basically, doubles your burn. And of course, energizing attack, so that when you're hitting twice, you're gaining even more AP. Next up, the mark shot stuff, or I should just say the shooting stuff. So this would be things like augmented aim, where you have increased free aim damage. You have breaking shots, so increased break damage. You have burning shots, chance to burn on free aim shot. You have things like marking shots, which synergizes well with rewarding mark, giving you extra AP back as you mark an enemy and then break the mark. Also, versatile. After a free aim hit, base attack is increased by 50% for one turn. This is basically just a second augmented attack. And sniper, this is what allows your free aim shot to break enemies. It's pretty darn nice, not 100% mandatory, but I would very strongly recommend it. You could also go into a little bit more break stuff. Increased break damage could break on basic attacks. And alternatively, you could also stack more raw damage increases. Things like inverted affinity, where he gets inverted, he can't heal for 3 turns at the start of a battle, but does 50% increased damage. Also, burn affinity, 25% increased damage because everything's always going to be burning. Then there's Myel, who uses Medallum to begin in Virtue stance. The every burn applied is doubled is nice, but certainly not necessary, and burns dealing double damage, again, is nice, but really it's the convenience of always starting in Virtue stance where you can nuke enemies. If you wanted to stack even more burns on an enemy, you could instead use Brularum, but it's a little harder to get into Virtue stance, or you could use something like Jarum to get into Virtue stance by counterattacking if foes are getting a lot of turns and if they're attacking you. You'll also hit like a truck, because this says 50% increased counter damage per shield, and if you're playing well, you should have at least 3 shields, so 150% counter damage. And for pictos in media res, you need this on all your characters. Energizing Gradient is just a really sick pictos with a massive amount of speed. That is why I'm wearing it. Then first offensive, first hit taken and dealt. I mean, it's okay in terms of damage, it's something, but realistically, I am just wearing it for the speed and crit rate to cap out Myel's crit. And you might notice, because I recently upgraded my pictos on this character as well, I have too much luck. This should be 99 defense because that is your weapon scaling, 99 agility. You really want an agility scaling weapon, and then after that, dump points into luck till you get to 100% crit, so I should have like 10 points here, the rest into might. In terms of luminas, very, very similar to Verso. So I'm not really going to talk about too much here, because it's pretty much the same defensive stuff and very similar offensive stuff. One very slight difference that I found to be quite helpful is Perilous Parry, as Myel needed a little bit more help generating her AP without the auto attack setup. Now, in terms of skills, again, I have a whole bunch here, but most of them are pretty situational. Most of the time, I'm going to be using Burning Canvas. This is the big nuke, because its damage is increased for each burn on a target, and you have a whole bunch of burns on a target. I'm guessing the value is capped. It's not like an infinite increase, and I'm probably way exceeding it, but it hits like a truck anyway, so I haven't really done the math. And then Swift Stride to get back into Virtue stance. Now, if an enemy needs to be made vulnerable to fire, you have Degagement. If you have a bunch of shields that for some reason Verso didn't break, I guess you can use Breaking Rules. Realistically, I just put this on because I don't know what else to use. Flurry Fury, if you need to break an enemy, or if you need to essentially skip your turn and stay in Virtue stance. And Phantom Strike, a little bit niche, but it is kind of nice for setting up if you want to do a Gamage. And yes, a good bit of her damage does also come from Gamage. This will hit much harder than anything else she can do. Just make sure to double her damage with CL before casting this skill, and also ensure that she is in Virtue stance. So speaking of, What are Ciel's skills and her weapon? Well, her weapon is Lithesome. So during Moon, all allies have greater rush. During Sun, all enemies have greater slow. During Twilight, both happen at once. You want to keep her in Twilight as much as possible. In other words, cast one Sun skill, then cast one Moon skill. And hey, having the plus 3 AP on applying a buff or a debuff, pretty good when you are frequently applying buffs and debuffs. Mostly buffs, though. In terms of skills, again, a whole bunch of stuff on her bar, most of which doesn't get used. The two skills that do get used are Intervention, target plays immediately and gains 4 AP. Prioritize Myel here, but also do whatever you need to skip an ally ahead of an enemy. So if it goes like Myel, enemy Verso, use it on Verso. If it's something like Verso, enemy Myel, use it on Myel. The reason I say Myel is prioritized here is because, at least with my setup, her speed is a little bit lower, so she tends to play after enemies. Then Fortune's Fury, whoever you need to nuke an enemy with. So if Verso is going to be doing a lot of damage and Myel isn't in Virtue Stance, she's not going to do a lot of damage, use it on Verso. If Myel is in Virtue Stance, she's set up to use Burning Canvas, hit for millions. Fortune's Fury on Myel, double that damage. If she is going to Gamage, absolutely Fortune's Fury. In terms of pictos, I just grabbed a bunch of things with speed. None of these really matter. Perilous Parry is kind of nice for extra AP gen as you parry. Aside of that, get speed. The crit doesn't even matter. Yeah, I know I have 120%, does not matter. I took all damage stats. Again, really doesn't matter aside of maxing agility. And in terms of Luminas, it's mostly just defensive stuff and then extra energy. Because the more energy you have, the more buffs you can apply. And Energizing Rush is a good way to get a little bit more AP. And so that's the build I've been using to set my enemies aflame and burn the canvas around them. I put it together because I was bored of using the Stendhal cheese, and I couldn't be happier with the end results. It's been very fun and highly successful in Act 2 of New Game Plus. And also fighting a bunch of things like Sprung that probably aren't intended at my current level, but you know what? The fight went fine, so it's not a big deal. I have to say, I am really impressed with how much buildcraft there is in Expedition 33. Going into the game initially, I was like, is this going to be the sort of game where power progression is just linear and you don't decide much because the weapon you get at level 50 is automatically better than the weapon at level 30? Turns out, no. They took some real inspiration from games like Elden Ring and put in all sorts of crazy ways to play, some of which feel like you're breaking the game but are fully intended, and some of which actually may break the game. But you know what? It feels super fun and is really rewarding to do it, so I actually don't mind. And so that said, as I approach endgame and get more tools, I'm going to try more builds. Will there be more videos? I don't know. I'm going to make another build video if I feel like it, and if I don't, I won't. With that said, I'm definitely going to make at least one more video on Expedition 33, specifically talking about and analyzing the story in more detail because I find that one of the game's most interesting points. Though that one's going to take me a bit to finish. For now, if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe you're early on in the game and just looking for a build to get started, check the video up in the card and down below. Otherwise, there should be something on screen right now that YouTube thinks you're interested in watching. For now, good luck with your builds. Thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.